Welcome to World Talk Brief. All right, so here's how we're going to break this all down. We're going to start with the big picture, this idea of a global democratic recession. Then we'll zoom right in on the United States as a pretty critical case study. We'll also dig into one of the key reasons why this is happening before looking ahead to see, are voters actually starting to push back and what's really at stake in the near future. So let's jump in. For years now, we've heard researchers talking about a democratic recession, but the latest data, it really suggests we've blown past some kind of critical threshold. All the major indexes, from the VDEM Institute, Freedom House, and the Economist Intelligence Unit, they're all pointing to the exact same conclusion. The world is deep in what they're calling a third wave of autocratization, and it's speeding up. Let's put a hard number on that. According to the VDEM Institute's latest report for 2025, there are now 91 autocracies in the world. But that number, well, it's only half the story. Because for the first time in over 20 years, the number of democracies has actually dropped to just 88. I mean, think about that. That's a complete flip from just a year ago. For the first time this century, autocracies officially outnumbered democracies on the world stage. The Economist Intelligence Unit gives us an even clearer picture. Only a tiny, tiny fraction of us, just 6.6% of the world, lives in what you could call a full democracy. Meanwhile, the single largest group, over 39% of everybody on the planet, is now living under authoritarian rule. And look, this didn't just happen overnight. This has been a long, slow decline. The global average democracy score has been grinding down for almost 2 decades now, falling from 5.52 back in 2006 to a brand new low of 5.17 in 2024. This isn't just one bad year. It's a sustained, systemic trend. And the human scale of this trend is, well, it's staggering. A full 72% of people on Earth, that's almost 3 out of every 4 of us, now live in an autocracy. You'd have to rewind all the way back to 1978 to find a number that high. So let's bring this home and see how this global trend is playing out in one of the world's oldest democracies, the United States, which was once seen as, an exporter of democratic ideals, is now being talked about as a textbook case of democratic backsliding. In fact, VDEM calls it one of the fastest episodes of autocratization in its modern history. To put that in numbers, the Century Foundation's democracy meter shows a really dramatic drop. In 2024, the U.S. scored a 79 out of 100. Okay, just 1 year later, in 2025, that score completely collapsed to 57. That's a 28% drop. The country basically went from an imperfect democracy to, and this is a direct quote, behaving like an authoritarian state. So, what's behind all this? Well, it's not any one thing. It's more like a systemic erosion of checks and balances. The main problem they identify is something called executive aggrandizement. That's when a leader just systematically takes apart the very institutions that are supposed to limit their power. And that goes hand in hand with ignoring what the courts say, targeting critics, and violating civil rights. The Century Foundation really puts the current moment into a stark historical context. They're suggesting the risk to American democracy isn't just high, it might actually be approaching a historic low point. So what's pouring fuel on this fire? Well, one massive factor, and this isn't just in the US, but in a lot of democracies, is the crazy influence of money in politics, right? When being accountable to wealthy donors becomes more important than being accountable to voters, the whole foundation of democracy starts to crack. But how did we get to this point? To a place where the voices of regular people can just be drowned out by these massive waves of political spending? Well, a huge part of it traces back to one single landmark court decision. Back in 2010, the U.S. Supreme Court ruling in Citizens United versus the FEC just completely changed the game for American elections. It basically said that corporations and unions have the same free speech rights as people, so you couldn't restrict their independent political spending. And that opened the floodgates for unlimited money in politics. And the impact of that ruling has been absolutely profound. Since that decision, spending by billionaires in U.S. elections has multiplied by a factor of 163. Get this. Over 80% of the money spent by billionaires in the 2024 election cycle came through channels that were actually illegal before Citizens United. This wasn't exactly a surprise, though. In his dissenting opinion way back in 2010, Justice John Paul Stevens gave this incredibly prescient warning. He argued the decision was a rejection of the common sense of the American people and that it would threaten the very integrity of self-government.
Okay, so as these democratic institutions get weaker, are people fighting back? I mean, despite this really grim global picture, there are these little pockets of democratic resilience. Some reason election results actually hint at a potential voter backlash against these trends.
You know, off-year elections can be like an early warning system for the public mood. And the 2025 races in states like Virginia and New Jersey, they gave us some pretty interesting clues.
Let's just take New Jersey's governor's race. The Democrat, Mikey Sherrill, won by a huge 13-point margin. Now, to put that in perspective, in the 2024 presidential election, the Democratic candidate only won that state by 6 points. This much bigger margin in 2025 suggests that voters who were really worried about affordability and the future of democracy were trying to send a clear message.
And all of this brings us to what's at stake heading into the next major U.S. elections. The 2026 midterms are really shaping up to be a proving ground for these two competing forces, autocratization on one side and democratic resilience on the other. And the battle is going to be the hottest in these key states. In places like Arizona, Michigan, and Wisconsin, single-party control of everything, the governor's office and both legislative chambers, what they call a trifecta, is on the line. I mean, a party sweep in any of these states could just totally change policy for years and years.
And you're going to want to pay special attention to Wisconsin. After its old GOP-drawn maps were thrown out as unconstitutional, the state has new, much more competitive districts. And that has put both the state House and Senate in play for Democrats for the first time since 2010, making it a massive battleground. So we're left with this really crucial question. With global democracy at this tipping point and the U.S. facing its own huge test, will the upcoming elections be a defense of democratic institutions, or will they just mark a deepening of this global democratic recession? The trends we've talked about today are definitely concerning. But the story of democracy is far from over. From the global fight against autocracy to these local battles for fair representation, the answer is ultimately going to depend on the actions of citizens. Subscribe to World Talk Brief for more clear, thoughtful explanations. World Talk Brief. News explained without the noise.